Jake Morrison felt like his head was going to split open. The metal floor was cold against his cheek, and every breath sent sharp pain through his ribs. He tried to remember how he got here, but everything after the explosion was fuzzy. The last clear memory he had was diving behind cover as plasma bolts lit up the forest around him. His squad had been on patrol near the human colony on Kepler 442b when the aliens attacked. Jake remembered shouting orders to his men, trying to get them to safety. Then there was a bright flash, a loud bang, and nothing. Now he was somewhere else entirely. The walls around him were smooth and white, made from some material he didn't recognize. Strange symbols glowed softly on panels near what looked like a door. The air smelled different too, like ozone and something metallic. Jake pushed himself up to sitting, wincing as his bruised body protested. His Marine uniform was torn and dirty, but he was still wearing it. That was something, at least. He checked his pockets quickly. No weapons, no radio, no gear. Just him and his dog tags. A soft hissing sound made him look up. The door was opening, sliding into the wall with barely a whisper. 3 figures walked in, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. They were definitely not human. The aliens were tall and thin, with gray skin that seemed to shimmer under the strange lighting. Their heads were larger than a human's, with big black eyes that reflected light like mirrors. They wore dark uniforms with those same glowing symbols he'd seen on the walls. The one in front stepped forward and said something in a language that sounded like birds chirping mixed with electronic beeps. Jake had no idea what it meant, but the tone seemed official. "I don't understand," Jake said, getting slowly to his feet. His legs were shaky, but he managed to stand straight. "Where am I? What happened to my squad?" The alien in front tilted its head to one side, studying him. It reached into its uniform and pulled out a small device. After pressing something on it, the device made a few beeping sounds, then the alien spoke again. "You are prisoner, human soldier. We process you now." The words came out flat and mechanical, obviously translated by the device. Jake nodded slowly. At least they could communicate. "What does that mean, process me?" he asked. "All prisoners go through assessment. Machine tells us about you. Dangerous or not dangerous? Useful or not useful?" The alien gestured toward the door. "You come now." Jake didn't see much choice. The other 2 aliens moved to either side of him. Not threatening, but clearly ready to act if he tried anything stupid. He followed the first alien out of the room. The corridor beyond was just as strange as the cell. The walls curved gently and the ceiling glowed with soft white light. More aliens walked past, some in uniforms like his escorts, others wearing different colored clothing. They all stopped to stare at Jake as he walked by. "First human we capture," the alien explained, noticing Jake's confusion at all the attention. "Very interesting for us." They walked for several minutes through the winding corridors. Jake tried to memorize the path, but everything looked the same. Finally, they arrived at a larger room filled with machines and equipment he couldn't begin to understand. In the center of the room stood something that looked like a cross between a medical scanner and a computer terminal. It was about 8 feet tall, made of the same white material as the walls, with dozens of blinking lights and displays covering its surface. More aliens worked around the machine, checking readings and adjusting controls. When Jake and his escorts entered, they all turned to look. Several of them started chattering excitedly in their bird-like language. The alien who had been talking to Jake approached one of the technicians. They had a quick conversation, pointing at Jake several times. Finally, the technician nodded and turned to Jake. "Stand here," it said through another translation device, pointing to a spot in front of the machine. "Do not move." Jake walked to the indicated spot and stood still. The machine began to hum and lights started flashing in patterns he couldn't follow. He felt a strange tingling sensation, like static electricity, crawling over his skin. The aliens watched the machine's displays intently. Numbers and symbols flashed across multiple screens. The humming got louder, then stopped abruptly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the machine made a sound like an electronic cough and began scanning again. The lights flashed brighter this time, and the tingling sensation was stronger. Jake watched the aliens watching the machine. Their expressions were hard to read, but they seemed confused. Several of them started talking at once, their voices rising in what sounded like excitement or alarm. The machine stopped scanning again. This time it was quiet for almost a full minute. Then it made a series of beeps and clicks, and new symbols appeared on the main display. The effect on the aliens was immediate and dramatic. The technicians stepped back from the machine as if it had caught fire. The ones who had brought Jake started chattering rapidly in their own language, their voices high and agitated. One of the technicians approached the machine cautiously and pressed something on its control panel. The display flickered and changed, showing different symbols. The alien pressed more buttons and the display changed again. "What's wrong?" Jake asked. "What's it saying?" The alien who had been translating for him looked at the machine, then at Jake, then back at the machine. Its big black eyes seemed even wider than before. "Machine says you are..." It paused, pressing buttons on its translation device. "Machine says you are unkillable." "What does that mean?" "We do not know. Machine never says this before. Not about any prisoner." The alien technician was still working frantically at the controls. It called out something that made all the others gather around the display. They stared at whatever they were seeing, and Jake could hear them whispering among themselves. Finally, the technician turned to the others and spoke in a voice that sounded very serious. Even though Jake couldn't understand the words, the tone was clear. This was important. This was big. The alien with the translator looked at Jake again, and this time there was something different in its expression. Something that might have been fear. "Machine has database," it explained slowly. "All species in galaxy. All warriors, all soldiers, all dangerous beings. Machine compares you to database." It paused, clearly struggling with how to explain. "Only 3 beings in all galactic history have this classification. All are legends. All are..." It consulted its translator again. "All are myths now. Their species extinct." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "And the machine thinks I'm like them?" "Machine does not think. Machine knows. Machine is never wrong." The alien stepped closer, and Jake could see his own reflection in those huge black eyes. "Human Jake Morrison, you are first of your kind we capture, but machine says you are something very dangerous, something we have never faced before." Jake wanted to laugh. He wanted to tell them they were wrong, that he was just a regular guy from Ohio who had joined the Marines because he couldn't afford college. He wanted to explain that he wasn't special, wasn't dangerous, wasn't anything but a soldier doing his job. But looking at the fear in the alien's eyes, and hearing the worried whispers of the technicians around the machine, Jake kept his mouth shut. Something told him that whatever had just happened was going to change everything. Commander Vexthar stared at the report on his screen for the 5th time in an hour. The words hadn't changed, but he kept hoping he had misread them somehow. The assessment machine had never been wrong before. Not once in the 300 years since the Zephyrian military had started using it. But this result made no sense. He touched a control on his desk, and the holographic display showed the scan results from the human prisoner. The bio readings were completely normal for the species. Height, weight, muscle density, bone structure, all typical for what they knew about humans. But then there was that classification at the bottom of the report. Unkillable Vexthar had pulled the historical records as soon as he received the report. In the entire galactic database, only 3 other beings had ever received this classification. The first was Korvash the Eternal, a warrior from the extinct Vrex Empire who had supposedly fought for 600 years before his people were wiped out by a plague. The second was something called the Iron Saint from the Lost Meridian civilization. The third was just listed as the last of Antares Prime, with no other details available. All myths. All legends. All from species that no longer existed, and now a human had the same classification. The door to his office chimed, and Lieutenant Zektar entered. The younger officer looked nervous, which was unusual. Zektar was normally calm and professional. "Sir, we have a situation," Zektar said. "The guard detail assigned to watch the human prisoner is requesting reassignment." "On what grounds?" "They claim the prisoner is unsettling them. Several guards have reported nightmares. 2 have requested medical leave due to stress." Vexthar set down his datapad and looked at his lieutenant. "The human has done nothing threatening." "No, sir. According to the reports, he mostly sits quietly in his cell. He asked for water twice and food once. He has made no aggressive moves." "Then what is the problem?" Zektar shifted uncomfortably. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Granted. The guards are afraid of him. Word about the assessment has spread throughout the ship. Everyone knows about the classification. The machine has never been wrong before, so they believe it," Vexthar finished. "They think we have captured something dangerous." "Yes, sir. The guards say being near him feels wrong, like standing next to something that could kill them without effort." Vexthar stood and walked to the window of his office. Outside, stars moved slowly past as the ship traveled through space. 3 days ago, this had been a routine prisoner processing mission. Now his entire crew was on edge because of one human in a computer classification. Double the guard detail, he decided. Use volunteers only. No one works that section who doesn't want to be there. Sir, there aren't any volunteers. What do you mean? I've asked. No one wants to guard him. They're all afraid. Vexithar turned back to his lieutenant. This was getting out of hand. Then we'll use security drones for now. No guards at all. Yes, sir. Should I inform High Command about the situation? High Command already knows. Admiral Kethmoran wants the prisoner transferred to the flagship as soon as possible. After Zektar left, Vexthar sat back down at his desk. He pulled up the communication logs and found the message he was looking for. It had come from Fleet Headquarters 6 hours ago, marked as highest priority. The Admiral wanted to see this human for himself. Meanwhile, 3 sectors away, Captain Lisa Hayes was studying the same information from a very different perspective. Her intelligence officer had intercepted several Zephyrian communications about a prisoner with an unusual classification. It had taken some work to decode the messages, but the references to Jake Morrison were clear enough. They're calling him what? Hayes asked, making sure she had heard correctly. Unkillable, ma'am, Lieutenant Kyle Barnes replied. It seems to be some kind of threat assessment their computers came up with. Hayes almost laughed. She had known Jake Morrison for 2 years. He was a good Marine, reliable and brave, but hardly superhuman. The idea that alien computers thought he was some kind of legendary warrior was absurd. What else do we know? She asked. They're moving him to their flagship, the Eternal Dominion. Our sources say the whole Zephyrian fleet is talking about him. Some kind of big deal for them. Any word on his condition? As far as we can tell, he's uninjured and being treated well. Maybe too well. The aliens seem to be afraid of him. Hayes stood and walked to the tactical display showing the local star system. The Zephyrian fleet was holding position near the gas giant, probably waiting for reinforcements. If Jake was being moved to their flagship, that might actually make a rescue easier. One ship was better than trying to search an entire fleet. Start putting together a rescue mission, she ordered. Small team, fast ship. We get in, grab Morrison, and get out before they know what hit them. Ma'am, intelligence suggests the aliens consider Morrison extremely dangerous. They might have him under heavy guard. Trust me, Lieutenant. I know Jake Morrison. Whatever their computers think he is, he's just a regular Marine who needs our help. Back on the Zephyrian ship, Jake was trying to make sense of his situation. The aliens had moved him to a larger cell with better accommodations. The bed was actually comfortable, and they had brought him food that was almost edible. But something was definitely wrong. Every time guards brought him something, they stayed as far away as possible. They would set food and water near the door and back away quickly, as if he might explode at any moment. When he tried to ask questions, they would answer briefly and then leave as fast as they could. The strangest part was how they looked at him. There was fear in their eyes, but also something else. Respect, maybe. It was like they thought he was dangerous, but also important. Jake had tried to explain that he was just a regular person. He told them about his home in Ohio, his job before the Marines, his completely normal life. But every word seemed to make them more nervous, not less. He was still thinking about this when the cell door opened again. Instead of guards, a group of aliens in different uniforms entered. One of them, older looking than the others, stepped forward. Human Jake Morrison, it said through a translation device. I am Commander Vexthar. We are moving you to another ship. Why? Jake asked. Our leaders want to meet you, to understand what you are. I'm just a soldier, Jake said for what felt like the 100th time. I'm not special. The commander studied him with those big black eyes. The machine does not make mistakes. If it says you are unkillable, then you are something we have never encountered before. What if the machine is wrong this time? Impossible, Vexthar replied immediately. The machine has been tested against every known species for centuries. It has never failed, Jake sighed. There was no point in arguing. These aliens believed their computer more than they believed him. When do we leave? He asked. Now. You will be transferred to Admiral Kethmoran's flagship. He wishes to study you personally. As they led him out of the cell, Jake noticed that the corridors had been cleared. No other aliens were visible anywhere. It was like they had evacuated the entire section just to move him. Word was definitely spreading. Whatever this classification meant to the aliens, it was causing quite a stir. Jake just hoped he could figure out how to use that to his advantage before things got even more complicated. The flagship Eternal Dominion was the largest ship Jake had ever seen. As the transport shuttle approached its docking bay, he could see other Zephyrian vessels spread out around it like a protective shield. This was clearly the heart of their fleet. The shuttle landed with barely a bump, and Jake's escorts led him through another series of sterile corridors. But these hallways were different from the previous ship. They were wider, more elaborate, with decorative panels and symbols that probably meant something important to the aliens. More importantly, they were empty, completely empty. "Where is everyone?" Jake asked Commander Vexthar, who had personally accompanied him on the transfer. "Admiral's orders. No crew in the sections where you will be housed. Only essential personnel allowed near you." "Why?" Vexthar looked uncomfortable. "There have been incidents." "What kind of incidents?" 3 maintenance workers on my ship requested medical leave after working near your cell. They reported feeling sick, having bad dreams. One collapsed during his shift." Jake stopped walking. "That's impossible. I haven't done anything to anyone." "Perhaps you do not need to do anything. Perhaps your presence alone is enough." They continued walking through the empty corridors. Jake was beginning to understand just how much his classification was affecting these aliens. They weren't just afraid of what he might do, they were afraid of what he was. Finally, they reached a new cell. This one was even larger than the last, with what looked like actual furniture instead of just a bed and basic facilities. There was a desk, a chair, even something that might have been entertainment equipment. "Dr. Elena Martinez is waiting for you inside," Vexthar said. "She will explain your situation better than I can." The door opened and Jake saw a human woman sitting at the desk. She was in her 40s with graying hair and intelligent eyes. She wore a torn civilian jumpsuit, and Jake could see she had been a prisoner for a while. "Dr. Martinez?" Jake asked as he entered. "Call me Elena," she said, standing up. "I'm a xenobiologist. I was captured 3 weeks ago when they attacked the research station on Kepler 438c. The door closed behind Jake, leaving them alone. Elena gestured for him to sit down. "They brought me here to talk to you," she continued. "Apparently they think I can help explain what you are." "What I am is confused," Jake said. "These aliens think their computer classified me as something called Unkillable, and now they're all terrified of me." Elena nodded. "I've been studying their technology since I got here. The assessment machine is incredibly advanced. It scans biological, psychological, and even quantum signatures. According to what I've learned, it has never been wrong about threat classifications." "Well, it's wrong now. I'm just a Marine from Ohio. That's what I told them when they first asked me about you. But Jake, I've seen how they're reacting. Half the crew on this ship is asking for transfers rather than serve on the same vessel as you. The other half think you're some kind of prophetic figure." Jake rubbed his forehead. This was getting worse by the hour. "What do you mean, prophetic figure?" "There's a faction among the younger Zephyrians who believe the machine's assessment means something bigger. They think humans are destined to conquer the galaxy, and you're the first sign of that future. That's insane. Is it? Look at it from their perspective. They've been using this machine for centuries. It's never been wrong. It classified legendary warriors who became myths throughout the galaxy. And now it's classified you the same way." Elena leaned forward. "Jake, whether you believe it or not, you've become a symbol. Some of these aliens think you're proof that humanity is more dangerous than they ever imagined. Others think you're a sign that they should surrender before they face more humans like you." Before Jake could respond, the door chimed. Elena called out permission to enter, and a young Zephyrian officer stepped inside. Unlike the others Jake had met, this one didn't seem afraid. If anything, it looked excited. "Dr. Martinez," the alien said through its translator. "I am Sub-Commander Yilneth. I request permission to speak with the human Morrison." "What about?" Elena asked. "I have questions about human military capabilities, about how many others like him exist." Jake and Elena exchanged glances. "Others like me?" Jake asked. "Yes. How many unkillable humans does your military have? How many more will come?" "I'm not unkillable," Jake said firmly. "I'm just a regular soldier." Yilneth's translator crackled as it processed Jake's words. The alien's expression changed to something that might have been confusion. "You deny what the machine has determined?" "The machine is wrong. Impossible." "The machine does not make errors," Elena intervened. Sub-Commander, perhaps you could explain why this classification is so important to your people? Yilneth looked between them, seeming to choose its words carefully. The three beings in galactic history who received this classification all brought great change. The Vrex Empire fell to disease after Corvash the Eternal disappeared. The Meridian civilization vanished after the Iron Saint's final battle. Antares Prime was destroyed, but its last warrior was never found. The alien paused, then continued. Each time the Unkillable One appeared before great shifts in galactic power. Many of my generation believe Human Morrison's classification means such a shift is coming again. And you think humanity will cause this shift? Helena asked. The pattern suggests it. An Unkillable appears, change follows. Now we face humans for the first time, and one of them carries the classification. Logic indicates your species will reshape the galaxy. Jake stood up, frustrated. Look, I don't know about reshaping anything. I just want to go home to Ohio and maybe watch some football. I'm not some legendary warrior. But you survived capture when your squad did not. You show no fear in captivity. You remain calm when threatened. These are the qualities the machine recognizes. Those are just normal human traits, Jake protested. Yilneth tilted its head. Normal for humans? Well, yeah. Any Marine would act the same way. There was a long silence. Jake could see Yilneth processing this information, and he could practically see the gears turning in the alien's head. You claim all human soldiers possess these qualities? Yilneth asked slowly. Most of them, sure. We're trained to handle stress and keep fighting even when things go bad. All of them? Jake was starting to realize where this was going. We have millions of people in our military, and yeah, they're all trained to be tough. Yilneth stepped backward, its large eyes growing even wider. Millions of humans with unkillable qualities. They're not unkillable qualities, Jake said quickly. They're just normal human qualities. But it was too late. Yilneth was already heading for the door, speaking rapidly into a communication device in its own language. Jake couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. This was urgent information that needed to be shared immediately. What just happened? Jake asked Elena. Elena shook her head, looking worried. I think you just accidentally convinced a Zephyrian officer that Earth has millions of legendary warriors. But that's not what I said. It's what he heard. Jake, these aliens have built their entire understanding of combat prowess around rare, mythical individuals. The idea that humans might mass-produce those qualities? Elena trailed off. What? It might just convince them that fighting humanity is hopeless. Jake sat back down heavily. Every time he tried to explain that he was normal, he seemed to make things worse. How could telling the truth about human military training make him sound more dangerous instead of less? Outside their cell, alarms began to sound. Elena and Jake looked at each other with growing concern. Whatever message Yilneth was spreading through the ship, it was causing quite a reaction. Jake was beginning to realize that his biggest problem wasn't being seen as unkillable. It was that every attempt to prove he was normal only convinced the aliens that all humans were extraordinary, and that might be the most dangerous misunderstanding of all. The alarms had been sounding for 6 hours now. Jake could hear them through the walls of his cell, a constant reminder that something big was happening on the ship. Elena had tried to get information from the guards, but no one would talk to them. Then the explosions started. The first one shook the entire ship, throwing Jake against the wall. Emergency lighting flickered on as the main power systems fluctuated. Elena grabbed onto the desk to steady herself. What was that? She asked. Before Jake could answer, another explosion rocked the ship. This one was closer, and they could hear the sound of rushing air and emergency bulkhead sealing. We're under attack, Jake said, recognizing the sounds from his military training. The cell door suddenly hissed open. Instead of guards, Sub-Commander Yilneth stood in the doorway. The young alien looked panicked, its normally composed demeanor completely gone. Human Morrison, it said urgently. You must come with me now. What's happening? Elena demanded. Your people are attacking the ship. They have come for the Unkillable One. Jake felt a surge of hope. Captain Hayes must have tracked him down, but Yilneth's next words confused him. The guard units assigned to your section have abandoned their posts. They refuse to be near you during combat. They believe proximity to an Unkillable during battle will result in their deaths. That's ridiculous, Jake said, but he followed Yilneth out of the cell anyway. The corridors were chaos. Aliens ran in all directions, some carrying weapons, others fleeing toward escape pods. Emergency announcements echoed from wall speakers in the Zephyrian language, but Jake could tell from the tone that things were going badly. "Where are we going?" Elena asked as they hurried through the ship. "Somewhere safe," Yilneth replied. "Admiral Kethmoran wants you protected. If the Unkillable one is killed, it could mean disaster for our entire fleet." They turned a corner and nearly ran into a group of Zephyrian soldiers. When they saw Jake, several of them immediately stepped backward. One of them started talking rapidly to Yilneth in their own language. Jake couldn't understand the words, but the soldier kept pointing at him and shaking its head. The tone was clear. The soldier didn't want to be anywhere near Jake. "What's he saying?" Jake asked. "He says his unit will not fight while you are on this ship. They believe your presence will bring death to anyone who opposes you. But I'm your prisoner." "I'm not fighting anyone!" "It does not matter. They believe the legend. Fighting near an Unkillable brings doom." More explosions echoed through the ship. These were definitely getting closer. Jake could hear the distinctive whine of human plasma weapons now, mixing with the alien sounds of Zephyrian energy beams. "Your people are closer than expected," Yilneth said, consulting a small device. "They have reached Deck 7. They continued moving through the ship, but Jake noticed something strange. Every group of Zephyrian soldiers they encountered had the same reaction. They would see Jake, their faces would change, and they would start backing away or even running in the opposite direction. "This is insane," Elena muttered. "They're more afraid of you than they are of the people actually shooting at them." They reached what looked like a command center. Admiral Kethmoran was there, surrounded by officers and displays showing the battle. When he saw Jake, his expression became even more grim than it already was. "The Unkillable human," the Admiral said through his translator, "you have brought chaos to my fleet." "I haven't done anything," Jake protested. "Your mere existence has done enough. Half my crew believes you are a harbinger of doom. The other half thinks we should surrender immediately to avoid facing more of your kind." On the tactical displays, Jake could see the battle happening around the ship. But something was wrong. Several Zephyrian vessels were pulling back from the fight, leaving large gaps in their defensive formation. "Admiral," one of the officers called out, "3 more ships are requesting permission to withdraw. The crews are refusing to fight." Kethmoran's translator crackled with what sounded like cursing. "They fear the legend more than enemy fire." Another explosion, much closer this time. The lights flickered again, and Jake could hear the sound of hull breaches being sealed. "Sir," another officer reported, "the human strike force has reached Deck 5. Our forces are retreating without orders." "What do you mean, retreating without orders?" "The soldiers see the human attack force and assume they are more Unkillables. They will not engage." Jake stared at the tactical display. Captain Hayes had brought maybe 20 people on this rescue mission. Against a ship this size with thousands of crew members, it should have been impossible. But the Zephyrians were running away from a handful of humans because they thought they were all legendary warriors. "This is my fault," Jake said quietly. "Yes," Admiral Kethmoran agreed. "Your classification has created fear throughout the fleet. Now that fear is being used against us." The sound of human weapons was getting very close now. Jake could hear boots running in the corridors outside the command center. "Admiral," Yilneth said suddenly, "perhaps we should consider surrender." "Surrender?" Kethmoran turned to look at the young officer. "If humans can produce unkillable warriors, if they can mass-produce legendary fighters as the Morrison human claims, then continuing this war is pointless. We cannot win against an entire species of mythical beings." "I never said we were mythical beings," Jake protested. "I said we train our soldiers to be tough." "That's completely different." But nobody was listening to him anymore. The command center erupted in arguments between officers. Some wanted to keep fighting. Others wanted to surrender immediately. The tactical displays showed more ships pulling back from the battle. Then the doors to the command center exploded inward. Captain Hayes came through the smoke with her strike team, weapons ready. When she saw Jake, her face lit up with relief. "Morrison, are you hurt?" "I'm fine, ma'am, but we have a problem." Hayes looked around the command center. Every single Zephyrian was on the floor, hands over their heads in surrender positions. No one was even trying to fight. "What kind of problem?" she asked. "They think you're all unkillable legendary warriors," Elena explained quickly. "Their computer classified Jake as something mythical, and now they believe all humans have supernatural abilities." Pilot Officer Ryan Cooper, who had come in with Hayes, started laughing. Seriously? They're afraid of us because of a computer glitch? It's not funny, Jake said. This is causing their entire fleet to fall apart. Hayes looked at the tactical displays, which were still showing Zephyrian ships retreating from the battle. How many ships are pulling back? About half the fleet, Admiral Keth Moran said through his translator. He had gotten to his feet but made no aggressive moves. My crews refuse to fight beings they believe are unkillable. But we're not unkillable, Hayes said. We're just Marines. Just Marines? Yilnith repeated. You defeated our defenses with only 20 warriors. You reached the heart of our flagship. How is this possible if you are not legendary fighters? Cooper grinned. We're really good at our jobs? The young Zephyrian officer looked confused. All humans are this good at combat? Well, not all humans, Hayes said carefully. But our military trains pretty intensively. How many humans receive this intensive training? Hayes glanced at Jake, who shook his head frantically. But it was too late. Oh, maybe 15 or 20 million active military personnel, Hayes said casually. The effect was immediate. Every Zephyrian in the room went completely still. Admiral Kethamoran dropped his translator device. 20 million unkillable warriors? Yilnith whispered. They're not unkillable, Jake shouted, but no one was listening anymore. On the tactical displays, Jake watched as more and more Zephyrian ships began powering down their weapons and broadcasting surrender signals. Captain Hayes looked at Jake with a puzzled expression. Morrison, what exactly have you been telling these aliens? Just the truth, Jake said helplessly. But somehow that's making everything worse. The war was ending, but not because of superior firepower or brilliant strategy. It was ending because an alien computer had made a mistake, and every attempt to correct that mistake had only made the aliens more convinced that humanity was unstoppable. Jake wondered if this was how legends actually started, not with grand gestures or heroic deeds, but with simple misunderstandings that grew completely out of control. 1 year later, Jake Morrison was back in Ohio, working on a car engine in his garage. The wrench slipped in his hand, and he muttered under his breath as he tried to get better leverage on the stubborn bolt. Outside, it was a perfectly normal Tuesday afternoon. Birds were singing. Someone was mowing their lawn down the street. And the most exciting thing happening was Mrs. Peterson's cat trying to catch a butterfly. It was exactly the kind of ordinary day Jake had dreamed about during those strange weeks as a prisoner of war. The peace negotiations had taken months to complete. Jake had been required to attend most of them, sitting at a big table in Geneva, while diplomats and military officials worked out the details of humanity's relationship with the Zephyrian coalition. The aliens still treated him like something special. Even now, a year later, they would ask specifically about his health and well-being during diplomatic meetings. Ambassador Carol Wright had learned to use this to humanity's advantage, casually mentioning that Earth had many citizens like Jake whenever negotiations got difficult. Jake's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. He wiped his hands on a rag and answered it. Morrison, Jake, it's Colonel Barnes. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Jake looked at the half-repaired engine. Just working on my car. What can I do for you, sir? We need you to consult on something. Can you come to the base tomorrow? Jake sighed. These consulting requests had become regular since his return. The military wanted his input on alien psychology, even though he kept telling them he didn't understand the aliens any better than anyone else did. What's it about this time? Dr. Turner finally figured out what went wrong with that assessment machine. We thought you'd want to hear the explanation. Dr. Alex Turner was the xenolinguist who had been studying captured Zephyrian technology. Jake had been wondering for a year what exactly had caused the machine to label him as unkillable. He was definitely curious about the answer. I'll be there, he said. The next morning, Jake drove to the base and met with Colonel Barnes and Dr. Turner in a secure briefing room. Turner looked excited, like someone who had just solved a puzzle that had been bothering him for months. So what's the story? Jake asked. It was a translation error, Turner said. But not the kind you might think. The machine didn't misread your biological data or make a calculation mistake. It read you perfectly. Then why did it call me unkillable? Because that was the closest translation it could find for what it actually detected. Turner pulled up a holographic display showing alien text and symbols. The machine was designed by a species called the Architects, who apparently built a lot of the technology the Zephyrians use. The architects understood psychological resilience as a form of immortality. What does that mean? Colonel Barnes asked. The machine detected Jake's mental state during capture, his refusal to give up, his determination to survive and protect his men, his psychological stability under extreme stress. To the architects, those qualities were literally a form of being unkillable. Jake frowned. But that's just normal human stuff. Any Marine would react the same way. Exactly, Turner said. And that's what made the classification so terrifying to the Zephyrians. They come from a species where psychological resilience is rare. Most of them break under severe stress. To them, the idea of a species where mental toughness is standard training was unthinkable. So the machine was right? Barnes asked. In its own way, yes. It correctly identified Jake as having psychological qualities that would make him extremely difficult to defeat or demoralize. The problem was translating that concept into terms the Zephyrians could understand. Turner switched to another display. The word unkillable was the closest match in their language for someone whose spirit cannot be broken. In their culture, that's the same as physical immortality. Jake shook his head. All this trouble over a translation problem. Not just a translation problem, Turner corrected. A fundamental difference in how our species understands strength and survival. Humans see psychological toughness as trainable. Zephyrians see it as a rare gift of the gods. After the briefing, Jake drove home thinking about what Turner had explained. It made sense in a weird way. The aliens had been looking at human behavior through their own cultural lens and coming to completely wrong conclusions. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Captain Hayes, who was now Major Hayes after her promotion for the successful rescue mission. Dinner tonight. Carol wants to discuss the latest diplomatic meetings. Carol was Ambassador Wright, who had become a friend over the past year. She often asked Jake to join her for informal dinners when she needed to prepare for meetings with Zephyrian representatives. Jake texted back that he would be there, then continued driving home. As he pulled into his driveway, he noticed a black car parked across the street. It had been there yesterday too, and the day before that. He recognized the signs. Security detail. Even though the war was over and relations with the Zephyrians were peaceful, the government still worried about his safety. Jake Morrison had become too valuable as a symbol to risk anything happening to him. That evening, Jake met Hayes and Ambassador Wright at a quiet restaurant downtown. Wright looked tired, which was becoming her normal expression these days. "How are the negotiations going?" Jake asked. "Better than expected," Wright replied. "The Zephyrians are actually eager to cooperate. They want to learn more about human military training methods. They're still convinced we have some kind of secret?" Hayes asked. "They know about the translation error now, but it doesn't seem to matter. They've seen what a small human strike force can accomplish. They've watched our Marines in action during joint training exercises. They're convinced that our psychological resilience gives us a massive military advantage." Wright paused to take a sip of wine. "The interesting thing is they're not wrong. Our ability to function under stress, to keep fighting when things look hopeless, to maintain unit cohesion in difficult situations, these really are significant advantages. So we're not telling them it's just training?" Jake asked. "We're telling them the truth," Wright said carefully. "We're just not going out of our way to downplay it anymore. If they want to believe that human military personnel are exceptionally tough, well, that's not entirely inaccurate." Hayes grinned. "It's certainly making the peace talks easier." "Speaking of which," Wright said, turning to Jake, "the Zephyrians have requested another meeting with you specifically. Admiral Kethmoran wants to discuss something he calls the Morrison Protocols." "What are those?" "New training methods they're developing based on their observations of human psychological conditioning. They want to create their own version of unkillable soldiers." Jake almost choked on his beer. "They want to copy human Marine training?" "Essentially, yes. They think if they can teach their people to think like humans, they can become more effective in combat situations." After dinner, Jake drove home through the quiet streets of his hometown. It was surreal to think that somewhere out in space, alien military officers were studying human training manuals and trying to figure out how to make their soldiers more like Marines from Earth. The really strange part was that it was probably going to work. Not because humans were actually unkillable, but because the things that made human soldiers effective, mental toughness, adaptability, refusal to give up, really were advantages in combat. Jake pulled into his garage and sat in his car for a moment thinking. A year ago, he had been just another Marine doing his job, Now he was a symbol of human resilience, a legend to an alien species, and apparently the inspiration for new military training programs across the galaxy. He still didn't feel like anything special. He still struggled with car repairs and worried about paying bills and wanted nothing more than to watch football on weekends. But maybe that was the point. Maybe being unkillable didn't mean being superhuman. Maybe it just meant being stubbornly, persistently, unbreakably human. The war had ended not because of superior weapons or brilliant tactics, but because an alien computer had recognized something fundamental about human nature and labeled it correctly, even if nobody understood the label at the time. Jake got out of his car and walked into his house. Tomorrow he would probably get another call from the military, asking him to consult on something related to alien relations. The day after that, he would go back to fixing cars and living his normal life. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he would always wonder if the machine had seen something in him that he still hadn't discovered yet. Something that made ordinary humans a little more extraordinary than they realized. Something that made them, in their own way, truly unkillable.